for joining us. And if you have not joined us in past, welcome. And as many of you know, ImpactPHL is a nonprofit advocacy organization helping investors large and small to align their financial assets with their values to create a more inclusive, sustainable, and resilient economy in the greater Philadelphia region. If you'd like to learn more about what ImpactPHL does and how we do it, please reach out to Corey Donovan, our executive director, and you'll find his information in the chat box. So I'm pretty excited about today's program. The program's about the 650,000 men and women that are released from prison each year in the United States to little or no employment opportunities. And this is costing the U.S. economy over $100 billion as measured by the GDP. During this session, we'll learn what Philadelphia is doing to navigate the reentry process and what investors can do to support fair chance hiring. So to help us with this, our panelists today is Sawyer, Quan Huyhn, and Chris Bentley. And they'll talk about how fair chance hiring practices allows returning citizens to expand their employment opportunities, build their entrepreneurial skills, and the importance of networks that connect across race, background, and wealth in ways that better stitch the top to the bottom as tools that make positive change. We'd like this program to be interactive, so please type your questions in the Zoom chat box. In respect to everyone's time, we will plan to stop this meeting promptly at 2 o'clock. So let's have some fun. Let's get started. And Chris, if you could just lead us off, and if you could take a few minutes to introduce yourself, and then also our guests. Why did you recommend and Quan to participate on this panel?
Sure, thanks, Mike. So my name's Chris Bentley. I'm the managing director of the De-Carceration Fund. The De-Carceration Fund is a seed stage fund that invests in companies that are trying to create disruption in the criminal justice system. So either solutions that are trying to prevent entry into the system, solutions that are trying to reduce suffering and impact to individuals, families, and communities that are impacted by the system, or solutions that are trying to make for a successful reentry out of the system. I've been in the impact investing space around Philadelphia for about 16 years now prior to this, formerly with a group called Sustained VC, and then with Serious Change Investments. Al and Quan would love to tell a little bit about my relationship with them and why they're on. So Quan Huyhn, I guess we met a couple of years ago. We were on a panel together at South by Southwest in Austin, talking about a very similar subject around supporting returning citizens and justice tech. Quan is executive director of the Southern California district of Defy Ventures. The mission of Defy Ventures is to shift mindsets to give people with criminal records the best shot at a second chance. Quan is also a best-selling author of Sparrow in the Razor Wire, finding freedom from within while serving a life sentence. Great book. I would recommend, actually. Got to read it during the week that I spent with Quan in Austin. Was reading the book at the same time, and it was really fascinating. It allowed us to have some really fascinating discussions together. L. Sawyer has served on our investment committee with De-Carceration Fund, and I've known him for several years. L is a exceptional filmmaker and social justice advocate. He's worked on numerous fellowships and worked with Robert Rochberg Foundation, Ford Foundation. He served on a committee for President Obama to advise on criminal justice reform efforts, and has really been an incredible mentor to me as I've gone through the learning process of figuring out, the best ways to impact different populations that have been impacted by the criminal justice system. And so I thought that they were both brilliant opportunities to bring in here and help with the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And I think the other piece that our audience should know is that both Il and Quan are not speaking about this theoretically. They did spend serious time in the system, so they know about it from the inside and out. So if I start maybe with Il, and Il grew up in North Philly, so he's local. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the federal effort in this fair chance hiring area. And if we look at the $48 million the DOL has set aside in Pathway Home grants for pre-release job training, and this was created in March of this year, does this help solve this problem?
Hello, Mike. Thank you so much for having me and everybody for watching. I think this is super important. The question is, does it help? I guess the first thought to that is like, help what, right? Like, the help what, right? Like if we're talking about recidivism, you can just sort of start there and think about if we're referring to people going back to prison. I can use Pennsylvania as an example. In Pennsylvania, 47% of people in prison, in the state prison in Pennsylvania, 47% are people that were on parole. They're back for parole violations, technical and direct violations. And granted, there is a large amount of folks that don't have employment, and employment is hugely important. But context matters in instances like this. And one thing that stood out to me when I heard about this a while back when they announced it was that it was pre-release. So just to give again some context, pre-release, when you have initiatives like this with pre-release, it turns into what would be called like incentive-based incarceration. So basically, folks have to act a certain way and maintain a certain behavior, if you will, to be enrolled in these programs, which then throws off. And if anybody's familiar or not familiar with the power dynamics within prison, from the onset, you're dehumanized. And I think what happens is programs like this or initiatives like this forget the bigger context of prison and what prison does to a human being, right? What prison is. Looking at, I think the first place to start for initiatives like this or any initiatives is looking at prison as an experience, a traumatizing experience that changes you. And that's for anyone. And that goes across runs the spectrum. So when you just see, okay, people coming home need jobs. Okay, we're going to throw money at this initiative to train people for jobs. Well, that's not considering where people are going home to, what they have access to at home, and their families are waiting for for a hero to come home and help them. Mom may have electric cut on with jumper cables, right? So folks don't have necessarily the opportunity to even take part in programming when they go home. Because that's not necessarily paying enough. I mean, there's a lot of different elements that's really not clear in this, as I was introduced to it months ago, and even just even now. And besides, there's a number of initiatives that came prior before that. Like there's a workforce initiative and workforce initiative and opportunities grant back in 2014, very similar to this, on a federal level that affected all stages of incarceration or systems across the carceral state. And
but I guess that
I don't
program,
know what we did. Mm-hmm.
but I guess the program didn't solve the problem, and there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect in that. When I quoted the number of the impact of the GDP of $100 billion a year, and we're looking at $48 million. That's the numbers don't match, with that. So if I ask Chris, if I look at impact investors, and how can an impact investor use their network to help fair chance hiring practices?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think network is going to be a sort of recurring theme in a lot of the discussion here. I mean, one obvious way, if you're an impact investor, presumably you're doing a good job about when you look at opportunities to invest in, about inquiring into, DEI programs and understanding the various forms of governance that the company that you're investing in has. One clear way is to make sure that the company that you're investing in does implement fair chance hiring practices. And there are some basics which are just sort of following the law. And I can talk a little bit about that later on in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. But then there are the going beyond, trying to make sure that the organization is open to and encouraged to provide these other opportunities, and understand that, as Elle pointed out, it's more than just creating a job, right? There's a whole lot of other ways to support individuals as they come home. But that's a sort of first start, and we can get into more later in the discussion. But a sort of first start is, when you look at a company, are you asking them about their fair chance hiring practices and how they implement them, and do they understand them?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. What struck me, and this is just in the news today, so we hear about the recent wildfires in Canada, and then you look at what's currently going on in Hawaii. What I was really surprised to learn is that California has over 1,000 inmates that they're using to fight these dangerous wildfires. And this program's been in place since World War II. And these firefighters are getting paid anywhere between $2 and $5 a day. And once they're released, the offenders are prohibited by law from being hired and working as a full-time firefighter. So I'm going to go to Quan, because this is your state. Can you explain how such a system can still exist in our country?
Well, I guess it still exists because people don't question it. They look at, oh, these are just policies. I think I even hear from companies that say they want to consider fair chance hiring, but then they have to consider the risks involved, or that it's against their HR policy. So it's a California policy, and it's written into the law, like, oh yeah, you can't hire them. I think I've even had men and women that come home, get a license, pass a real estate license or pass an optician's license, and then they're barred from working because of a conviction from 30 years ago or something, and then they have to fight it, or they say, oh, we'll give you a license, but it has to be restricted, and we tell them no, they have to fight it. So I mean, it's a way to continue to create barriers for reentry for our returning citizens.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it just seems very unfair. And if I go to Chris and just talk about supply chain. So yeah, you look at, you could look at Walmart, you could look at McDonald's, you could look at a number of companies that are using prisoners in their supply chain to build a product at very, very low wages. So how, as an investor, do you look at that, and what is the incentive for the prisons to advance the release of prisoners if they're kind of making money on their backs?
Right. To be clear, there's over 4,000 companies, right, that are profiting off of the extractive nature of the prison industry, right, and that includes things like labor practices, and so there's an organization called As You Sow that did that we were part of a advisory for that did a lot of work to sort of identify from a private investment, from a public investment standpoint, what does your portfolio look like, and how does your portfolio is your portfolio invested in things like for-profit prison industry, companies that are using prison labor, That, you know, the thing about it that happens so often is that those same companies are often not the companies that are providing great employment opportunities after, right? And so there's not a connection between labor, and oftentimes forced labor, that goes on in the prison industry and job opportunities. You know, when people come home, there's very little connection between those two items.
Yeah, no, thanks for that clarification. And yeah, just on the fair chance hiring, you know, so that kind of leads into Quan, just your background, and why did you start your own business rather than seek employment when you were released from prison?
Well, my brother had a real estate firm. I was working with him, but I knew I could never get a real estate license. So I had to work under my brother. Within the first 90 days, I was his top performing employee, but I couldn't get paid like a real estate because I didn't have the license. So luckily, I worked under him. I saw an opportunity to create a commercial cleaning company. I mean, I'm a Defy Ventures graduate, and we're always talking about what's the opportunity, and as entrepreneurs, that's what we do. So I saw an opportunity to create a cleaning company. I went with it, and then I mean, it's still running to this day. 6 employees, about to be 7. 4 of them about to be 5, formerly incarcerated. And I tell everyone, those are my best workers by far.
And is this unusual for somebody that's exiting, being released to start their own business? You know, so you mentioned one industry, the real estate industry, that prohibits you. I brought up the firefighters unions, and in California. Do you know, is this rampant throughout our culture that you can't work in a number of industries?
I would say it's not only the industries, it's actual employers, like employment companies, HR policies. It's just written into like their practices, or some of them get. I mean, we've had plenty of our men and women that have come home, have interviewed for jobs. I mean, we're dealing with one right now. He was working at Amazon, was doing very well as a truck driver. He promoted. Then he went to apply for the county of Riverside. They offered him the job. Then he moved, quit his job at Amazon. He was then pending the background check. They ran the background check and they rescinded the offer. And they said, oh, because he had a background. So, I mean, it happens all the time. It's a lot more prevalent than I think the general public knows.
Yeah, that's just wild to me, because if I look at the many programs, and we've done our share of them with ImpactPHL, where did the diversity, equity, and inclusion, the DEI programs, and in preparing for this program, I just realized that the DEI doesn't include all types of people. It includes, you know, race, gender, sexual preference, religion, but it does not include ex-offenders. You know, so there is something that's missing, you know, with that, when you're looking at it and saying, yeah, we have a diversified workforce. And you know, can you just comment on that, Chris, on how an employer, you know, can ask that question about, have you been incarcerated?
Right. So there are a few regulations in place that are improvements maybe from where we've been, but Philadelphia has what's called the Fair Criminal Record Screening Standards Ordinance, which is sort of better known as Ban the Box, and that prohibits employers from inquiring about convictions during the application process or during the initial interview. It also prohibits personnel decisions based on records of arrest that did not result in conviction, right? So if somebody's been arrested for something, they're not convicted. So that helps, and this applies to city employment as well as any private employers with more than 10 people in Philadelphia. So it helps, but it does not. It is very loose in sort of once you get beyond that first interview process in terms of, how you can decide to remove somebody from eligibility once you learn about a conviction. The state of Pennsylvania has a similar policy that applies to state employees, but not to private employers. All that Pennsylvania has is a code that that says that you can't consider a felony and misdemeanor conviction beyond the extent to which they relate to an applicant's suitability for employment, which is so broad that can be, sort of applied in just about any way possible, right? So there's very little that the state of Pennsylvania has done to sort of improve the opportunities that exist, and the result is, right, 23% at best. Historically, we've had 23% unemployment for individuals with criminal convictions. That's higher than the unemployment has ever been in the history of the country, including the Great Depression, right? So that's the state of, in this economy today, with record low unemployment, that's the state of employment opportunities for individuals with convictions.
So if you look at Quan, you look at Il, they are success stories. So the Il, if I look at you, you live in Philadelphia, and then you've been a successful member of our society for over 20 years. Is your story a typical one?
Yeah, no, it's not typical at all, unfortunately, and it would lead you to think that there's something special about me, and there's not. I think what is extraordinary about what I've been privileged to have is amazing people and organizations. I think I'm always someone that speaks about the importance of networks and understanding how to receive a network. Just really brief, I am a filmmaker, and I was introduced to film at Greater Ford Prison. I was there for about 2 years on an 8-year sentence when I was stabbed in my cell. I didn't think I was coming home, so I came up with an idea to actually video myself to send my son, tapes of myself home, talking to him in the event that I didn't come home. So I got on the video crew. While I was on the video crew, Glenn Holston, who was a Philadelphia filmmaker, beautiful human being, came to the institution with Lily A, documenting them. And Glenn ended up being a mentor for me and teacher for me. But initially, although Glenn possessed all the opportunities in the world, I was avoiding Glenn at the time because he represented something that was so foreign to me. Hence the reason I say context matters. I didn't know how to speak to Glenn. Glenn's not from the culture I'm from. That didn't look like me or anybody I knew. So the idea is that it took elders in the institution that cared enough about me to actually get me to see the value in interacting with Glenn, which then was a life-changing piece for me. Then I was able to go home. But really brief, again, once I came home to the sort of nestle of amazing community-based organizations. I mean, the Village of Arts and Humanities, the Philadelphia Folklore Project, Scribe, for Christ's sake, right? Like, and then funders and people like David Haas and Feather Houston, right? Like, we're talking about amazing people that didn't see me as DC 3617, and I have amazing folks in between, obviously not to name names, but the idea is like, and my family also, but film then allowed me, and these organizations allowed me a safe space to actually to create, be present in a productive way for my respective communities, learn, grow, and be fostered. And I think that's, it sounds like a very altruistic sort of approach, but considering the amount, if we really unpack, and we will unpack the amount of trauma and conditioning that one goes through in being institutionalized, there's a lot of repair that needs to happen. Again, even down to, without knowing, obviously, there's people on the call that, would say, the word inmate. To me, that's can be hurtful, not for somebody intentionally saying it, but just like hearing it jars me. And the idea is like in our normal, in our normal discord, we use words that is dehumanizing because that's how we know. So when we were referring to how is it possible about the firefighters, it's possible because we, without knowing, have dehumanized 2 million people in America, right? Like they're literally not perceived to be on par with everyone else. I mean, we wouldn't ask, the people in those respective towns in California to, for free, basically, to actually jump out of a plane and put out these fires, right? But it's okay en masse to actually ask people that fathers, mothers, daughters, sons, right, to actually go and risk their lives and die in some cases. So just using that as one example, again, it starts with, I mean, words matter, like, context matters, and seeing each other as humans that need repair and need support and opportunity. I think that's where it starts at.
And a couple of things just to peel back is that the one said you said your situation is not normal, to be back in society for over 20 years and not have re-entered. And if you could tell us a little bit about that statistically is one thing. The other thing I thought it was fascinating when we're doing our pre-call meeting, when you're saying where you started, like that what your position was where you started, and we're talking about if you start at the bottom, which is okay, is there a way to climb up on the ladder, or do people hire you at the lower rung and say this is all you are? Is that?
Yeah, and I think that comes down with the instruction of folks inside institutions that are transitioning home, for them to have an understanding of what to expect, right? Again, when I mentioned to you 47% of people go back to prison now for technical violations with parole, if you unpack what those technical violations are, there's literally a disconnect between the agent and the parole and the individual. A lot of the times people go back to prison for things that's not even a violation. Like, right. So I'm saying this to say is that the idea is like people inside institutions coming home don't thoroughly know what to expect, to be able to plan for, even down to when you get a job, what is my station at that job, and what opportunities do I have to grow, and how do I then step into that? Again, when I met Glenn, I didn't know that Glenn was a resource. I was never taught that. And then my elders, Haroon, Daoud, Shakur at Greater Fort, they told me that he was a resource. And actually, not only to take as a resource, people network like they're looking for charity. It's not that. It's how can I be a service to this network? That's a different diagram, a different way of approaching it. And again, that's the asset. Because if you have a situation where people are being trained through this Department of Labor piece, it's like how much is being trained, soft skills is being trained in the way of like being an asset to a company, right? Showing up, right? Making yourself, that much valuable in a way that you understand that it's not going to be all good at first, right? Like, and it's a way to actually network your way, and we all are here based off of networking. I mean, that's just what it is, whether it's through, infinity groups or infinity groups reaching down to folks. And that's been my case. It wasn't people that looked like me largely that put me in position. It was people that didn't necessarily look like me, that seemed human in me to actually grow. But it took me to be able to show up in a way that I felt like I was an asset, and that I could be a service to, within that network as well. It wasn't charity at all. So
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing too with that. And I've looked at the videos that and the work that Il has done with Ming, his production company, and they're just some really, really good stuff. So if any of you, if you want to throw that in the chat box, Il, the website, you should see the work that he's done. Chris, maybe if you started this, and I don't know anywhere in the country that has an investment fund that focuses on this area, your De-Carceration Fund, and can you please list the things that need to happen for reentry to be successful? So, what have you learned through the companies that you're invested in and your work?
Well, one of the things we learned, and Elle touched on this, is that employment, we talk about employment ends up being at the top of the list of, sort of markers that we discuss around prediction of recidivism, right? But there are so many things that impact not only somebody's ability to stay employed or get a job, but how they can use that, employment as well, right? So, I mean, just the fact that somebody have a living wage and the ability to have, forward-looking opportunities to move up, right? That's one of the things we talked about a lot. But then there's also areas like, do they have access to stable housing? Do they have access to healthcare, including mental health and rehabilitation stuff, right? Do they have access to financial products, right? Many people come home and cannot open a bank account or a conventional bank account. These are all sort of critical issues that, that when not stabilized, reduce your ability to maintain a job or reduce your ability to keep moving forward. But another thing that's super powerful is what Elle brought up, right? Networks. And that's something that I think everyone here, can help with, which is opening up your network, truly opening up your network to people that don't have access to the network. Because that, I was having a conversation with Elle about this, I think when we were preparing for this, and, money is one thing, but networks are far more powerful than money, right? So truly opening a network and making introductions to individuals, particularly when you see somebody that's exploring entrepreneurial opportunities, and they need connections, they need, access, not just to capital, but access to better supply chains or access to better, access to politicians that might help them navigate, regulatory issues, all sorts of things. And I think that that's really a truly valuable piece to help in the success.
So
Can I add one thought to that, Mike, if it's possible?
yeah, sure.
So it's and again, everything Chris said, but like I would also add again, soft skills as a citizen. Like we're talking about being a father, right? Like I'm talking about there's a gentleman, Robert Reed, who worked at U.S. Attorney's Office, right? Like we're talking about having close relationships with my network and seeing them parent or seeing them as and seeing and aspects that I wasn't privileged to actually see, right? So I could model. The idea is about, again, there's a saying they say for every new world is a new, makes for a new brain, makes for a new worldview. So the idea is we need to understand that people are coming from a complex environment to a complex environment, right? And then and there's different rules that govern this space that is different from the space that because it ain't just about reentry. It's about transitioning and getting folks getting folks adapt to this space in a real way, in a productive way that they can sustain here. And it comes down to family and how am I being a service and so all those soft skills as a society, I think is that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then Quan, what are your thoughts on this? What to make reentry successful? What things can you add to this conversation?
I mean, I also want to highlight what Elle said about the network. I mean, that's what we're really big on at Defy. Also, is bringing the network, building a community of people to support. I say also on top of everything Elle and Chris said, let's say if we're talking to employment partners, then there has to be intentionality on the onboarding process of somebody within range. So understanding the challenges from hiring from this population, but also understanding like the huge benefits that you can get, like somebody that's going to be very hardworking, very loyal, but then they might have to call in on the morning of because the pro agent says come in for a piss test, and so there's a lot of challenges around that, and just getting the employer or the company invested in, hey, if this is the route that you're going, there's a lot of great benefits, but then there's also some challenges that you might want to be aware of. I say also, like we're talking with this other VC firm out here, and I think one of the things they were talking about is talking to employers that have signed onto this fair chance. And then I say, well, there's a difference between somebody professing to hire or say, okay, I'm liking to sign on, but can we go back and circle back and see how many did they actually interview and hire, or what is the process? What's the progress on
this? You
this?
could just step back, just one step. You're talking about the Fair Chance Act in California. Can you tell us what that is, and is that in other states and how it works?
But basically, kind of what Chris said, ban the box. But I mean, out here in California, we know it's pretty much toothless. It's like ban the box, so they can't ask about the criminal conviction before the interview. But then if the person is interviewed and they're the best possible fit, and then they usually go, okay, we're gonna give you an offer pending a background check. So typically when I'm talking to employers, I usually say, listen, we're not asking you to give any jobs. There's not charity cases. What we're asking you to do is do your interviews. If you settle on the best possible candidate, and if it happens to be one of our graduates, we're asking you to either be willing to look past the criminal conviction or bring them in for additional interviews and ask them about their journey, ask them about their transformation process, how did they go through changes, their work experience, get to know them as a human being. And then you'll see that this is somebody worth investing in. That's the way we go about it. But I've seen the Fair Chance Act out here in California. They don't ask about the criminal conviction beforehand, but like I said, a bunch of our graduates get offered a job pending a background check. It pops up and it gets rescinded. So.
And this question is for any of you is, so if I look at employment and I look at large companies, if I look at the Fortune 500 companies, are they the best match for somebody that's coming out of the system? Or are we really focused on local businesses that are willing to be less structured and have less rules in place?
I mean, I think like I'll jump in. I don't know, Quan, if you want to say something, but I think again, you know, people coming out of prison obviously we're not a monolith, obviously, right? So again, no different from, you know, sometimes a corporate setting works better for some folks than others, generally speaking. And again, as I say, for me, given again, I failed 4 times in you know, in school. I never even attended a high school. I was illiterate when I went to juvenile. Never held a job before. So again, from my stance, when I came home, that, you know, a nonprofit organization in a community-based nonprofit organization fit me and where I was at skill-wise. Not that it was a low bar. And last thing we want to do is create this space of it's create a space that's okay to fail or a low bar for anyone. No, again, it was at the Village of Arts and Humanities which had a high bar for what I was capable and my skill level called for at the time. But there's folks that, you know, come out of prison and have had an experience where they actually, you know, honed their skills in reading and other elements, you know, I mean, that they were able to come home and work in a very high functioning, high structured sort of environment. So everybody's different, I think I would say.
Mm-hmm. And then how did that go? So you had described to me as that you started out, you know, as the janitor of the organization, but where did you end up in the organization?
So yeah, I ended up volunteering for no pay at all. I felt super obligated because they introduced me to Glenn, who introduced me to film. And I, like I say, it was just sweeping the streets and cleaning vacant lots with them for free. And then ended up being, when I did get paid, it was $7 an hour, right? But I ended up being the director, and I was director there. I was there ultimately like 14 years
Yeah.
at the Village. So yeah, I mean, but it gave a place, and I always see Philly like that just generally, right? I feel like Philadelphia as a whole is a big city, but it's small enough that you could, you know, there's ways to network to places that if you were in a larger setting, you wouldn't necessarily be able to, you know, ascertain or to reach. So if given the right network, someone could have the ability, generally speaking, to grow at organizations. And the Village of Arts was one of those organizations that they understood enough of my value. They fostered it, even in my mistakes. And that's the other thing too. I would say that let's not say and make it like people hire somebody, people's not gonna know. I mean, this is a process. You know what I mean? And so yeah, so it's not only not having a job just immediately means you don't go back to prison. What are we talking about? You know, not at all. So the idea is like not even having a network means you're not going to go back to prison. I mean, that's just
super interesting to me because if I
yeah.
some of the work that I've done in the charter school space in these underserved communities, it reminds me of a success story in that you look K through 12. And there's rules, this is the way you carry your books, this is what you do, this is how you walk down the halls, and the kids are able to be successful in school and in the elementary, middle, high schools. What's happened though is when they do, if they're lucky enough and they want to go to college, there's a huge failure rate with that. So those skills that they learn that they don't translate in the real world. And so what they found out is that they need a mentoring program. They need to basically to look at these higher education organizations, the colleges, universities, and they're better off in a lot of cases sending a bunch of kids to the same school, and that would help them transition, because these kids are showing up to college, they don't have the right clothes, the right bedding. People immediately know that they don't fit in, and they don't have the skill sets that can make them successful. So if
I mean, kids are people are a part of a bigger community, and again, you're dealing with folks. It's like a tire being on the ground. You're dealing with that one part that's touching the ground. The idea is they're we're talking about generational trauma, generational poverty, racism. I mean, we're talking about, and the way I show up to a job isn't necessarily what I have to go home to too. So again, when people are creating these job programs, they're not considering even the communities in which people are coming. But the failure of that individual it looks like, oh, they had an opportunity, they went away. They had an opportunity, they fumbled the ball, so they must want to, they must, want to be in prison. I don't know what people think, but just because you give someone an opportunity, again, you give somebody an opportunity, it could be the best opportunity for you. The question then becomes, is that opportunity catered in a way that understands and respects the conditioning of the people that you're providing opportunity for and to.
Yeah.
So
if I look at all the 2 million, approximately 2 million men, women, and young adults that are currently being incarcerated, can you just comment on your experiences of the harms the prison system on a person's social skills, trusting others, and feeling a part of society? What they're facing.
well, I mean, again, like I alluded to earlier, I said, first of all, prison is a poverty relocation program. I mean, that's just what it is, and it's
Poverty
a
relocation.
relocation program. I mean, if it's like you have that's just on the face of what it is. So, and it's also like an instrument of trauma. I mean, we're talking about we're social people. I mean, like I say, the Surgeon General just put out a memorandum. The U.S. Surgeon General put out a memorandum in May that spoke about the trauma of social isolation. And in an 86-page report, he never mentioned one time prison. And prison is, by definition, social isolation, and all those traumas that he referred to, saying social isolation, he defined it as the lack of meaningful, loving connection to others, even if you're amongst others, is equivalent of smoking 16 cigarettes a day. And he has all these other sort of, analogies, and not to belittle people with social isolation issues that in our society post-COVID or whatever, but we're talking about prison. And then social isolation, generally speaking, has nothing on institutionalization. Again, my name was DC 3617, going into an institution. When I left, it was DC 3617. So they, I am inmate, right? I knew which bathroom to use. They had to think, like, we're talking about on a very psychological level. I'm someone's father. I'm expected to come home and take care of a family. I'm not even man enough, if you will, because I identify that way. I'm not even man enough in that structure to actually stand up for myself or say I can drive, walk down the prison hallway to the library without having to, have enough agency. You don't have agency to do anything that way for yourself. You have to check in. And the idea that checking in every time over long periods of time lessen someone's ability to have that sort of agency necessary to break that what would be pull of gravity. Is what the name of my film. Anyways, to break that pull of gravity upon return. So again, when families don't even realize the conditioning that happens when someone's inside the institution, and then when they come home, these people are traumatized, right? And then all of a sudden, you got folks, and just to give an example, you got folks right now that has been on a thing called Z code. And Z code, for everybody that don't know, Z code is when you were mandated from a psychological perspective, mandated in the institution that they could not put another person in your cell for safety reasons. All of a sudden, this individual may do 30 years on the Z code, and then all of a sudden, this individual I'm referring to, comes home and is in bed with his wife. You know, I mean, we're talking about as soon as a leg touches a leg, like you're triggered. Like, I mean, I get these stories all the time. We're talking about there's no comprehension from the institution what prison does to a human brain. There's no comprehension down to society, to family members about who's coming home. And there's no comprehension information told to the individual that is transitioning home, what they may expect. So it's a complete setup, but yet you're expected to succeed when you really don't have the psychological comprehension about yourself or the tools to do so. So it's a complete setup. I'm sorry. And then society looks at, if I spend $48 million for you to get training and you still can't make it, something's wrong with you. I'm like, hold up.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm sorry to keep talking, but
No, thank you.
I'll just keep going.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. This
Thank you.
is information that we don't have, that we need. So thank you. Chris, I can go back to you before we get to some of the questions from the audience. The De-Carceration Fund, can you just describe a couple of the companies that you're investing in? I know you're in a $25 million raise right now, but just give us examples of a couple companies that are making a difference or can make a difference going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So, excuse me. Three of we have 4 companies in the portfolio so far. We have a company that's called Uptrust. Uptrust is a communication platform, started off as a way for public defenders to stay connected with their clients. The goal was to try and, through this two-way communication, reduce the likelihood of technical violations. There are dozens of ways that individuals can end up back in prison that don't involve committing a new crime, and these technical violations oftentimes can be avoided just by better communication. They through reduced failure to appear rates actually have avoided over 150,000 individuals from returning back to prison. So big impact there. Another company called Untapped Solutions, founded by a returning citizen, Andre Pert. This is a company that on the outside looks almost like a Indeed platform to connect returning citizens with employers. They're fair chance hiring focused employers.
Well, those are 2 good examples. I'm going to turn to Corey Donovan. He's the executive director of ImpactPHL to look at, in addition to the De-Carceration Fund, there are other investment opportunities in businesses that are making a concerted effort to hire returning citizens. So can you tell us about some of these opportunities in the greater Philadelphia region, Corey?
Yeah, sure. So again, I think I'm always trying to think about when I'm on a call like this, what can I do from where I am? And a big part of supporting and returning citizens is supporting the businesses that have, as we've heard today, intentionally hire them, support them in transition, et cetera. A lot of you are probably familiar with, and Amani's on the call here, Wash Cycle Laundry. There's Grant Boulevard, which is a clothing company that hires formerly incarcerated women and teaches them skills to in that industry. Triple Bottom Brewing on Spring Garden. First Step Staffing, which is a staffing company that often gets a first job for a lot of folks that are formerly incarcerated and formerly homeless, and Down North Pizza. So I think not only should we support them with our dollars, but just like any other business, they need capital in order to be able to do what they do, ideally mission-aligned capital from investors that care about these issues. And that's ultimately what ImpactPHL is about, is getting our capital invested in the businesses that create solutions to Philadelphia's challenges rather than creating the problems or exacerbating the problems. So if you are an accredited investor and you're interested in any of that, I'll drop my email back in the chat again, and we would love to chat.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I I just want to encourage everyone to take a look in the chat box. There are some incredible conversations going back and forth with people there, with ideas, with resources, just some really, really good stuff. So if you just take a minute and go through there, I think you'll learn a lot, and there'll be things that can direct you in a real positive way. Maybe Corey, if you could just talk. I know Chris had brought up As You Sow as a resource that he uses in the prison-free area, and I know that Andrew Baer, the executive director of As You Sow, they're an Oakland-based or San Francisco. They're Oakland-based organization. Is going to be in Philadelphia on September 13th. So if you could just tell everyone a little bit about that program, and then I could tell you about a program that we have in September as well.
Sure. So As You Sow is, Chris mentioned them earlier. I use that on a daily basis as we're talking to people about know where your money sleeps at night and know what it's doing. If you care about racial justice, social justice, or any related issues, they have a lens or a filter where they give a letter grade to what your money is doing, A through F. That's one of the things I love about it. You don't have to be a sophisticated investor to understand what your money is doing. Everybody went to grade school. So so you can go to As You Sow. I dropped the link in the chat earlier, plug in the ETFs and the mutual funds that you owned, and get a grade back on it. And so As You Sow, Andy Bihar, the CEO, will be in town. A lot of times we are amplifying what other people are doing. And Andy will be in town on September 13th. We are hosting, co-hosting with them a social, just to have these conversations and get to know the people and the tools and how we can all make progress on it. And then Mike, you can talk about the program that we're doing later in the month.
Yeah, sure. And I want to thank our speakers too, because these are just such an important topic, and I want to give everyone a chance. Kind of last comment. So if I could start with Quan, as to just kind of to wrap up what your thoughts are, and then if we go Quan, Il, and then Chris, that would be great.
I just like to say thank you for giving us the space, and yeah, thank you for your interest in this work.
Thank you. And Il?
Likewise, I'd like to echo whatever Quan said. No, thank you so much. I mean, Corey, Michael, and Imani, right? I didn't see. I can't see. But thank you so much for having me and having us, and thank you for everybody that's viewing. And feel free to reach out to me. I think I'd definitely love to be a part of whatever conversations that's happening now in these conversations. So in this genre or whatever. But thank you.
And Chris?
Yeah, thank you as well. Sort of the one sort of final comment I'll leave with, and this is particularly as you're thinking about your networks and opening up your networks and engaging with folks, is it's also, this can be a particularly difficult thing. I think a lot of thanks to Taylor Paul, who's in the audience here, who helped me learn a lot of this, but he's also on my investment committee. But going into these discussions, you can't go into these discussions expecting to be fully trusted by individuals or thinking that you deserve it, whatever your intentions are, right? And that can be hard for people with all the best intentions. So, make sure you understand that when you're working with individuals that have had to experience this trauma, that you shouldn't always expect trust in return right away. And trust takes time. So don't lose sight of the goal from that.
No, that's great, Chris. Yeah, thanks. Thank you for all of you. I want to tell you about the program that we have coming up. So, but if you'd like to learn more and be part of the sustainable and impact investing movement in the greater Philadelphia region, please contact me, John Moore, or Corey Donovan. I also want to encourage everyone to attend our September program. It's proxy voting beyond the headlines. So we have engine number one that'll be here. We have ICCR, and we also have As You Sow. So it's September 27th at 12 o'clock. And the link for registration is Colleen has put up on the screen. So I look forward to seeing everyone and to thank everyone for their consideration in this fair chance hiring opportunity that's out there. So take care.